one of the things that you asked is, what are we going to do if we return to a phase 3? And obviously for us on a couple of these questions, it really is about keeping our a pulse to the ground in terms of what guidance we're getting from the state, what the CDC is recommending. Right now, we're safe to move forward as we plan to accommodate families with multiple options in the fall. What are our biggest challenges is one of the things that you asked us to address. I think the biggest is really just ensuring that parents are free to choose the option that works best for their families. I think one of the challenges that we face as a school district is just a lack of trust. We have, even though we've built the last 3 years an intentional effort around transparency, we did it with the water. When we had that crisis, we had a very public conversation, and we saw that other school districts across the nation began to take our same approach, who had aging buildings around water. We did the same thing with the facility studies and understanding the investment that it's going to take to bring our buildings back to where they need to be. There has not been a challenge that we faced without communicating with all of our stakeholders, and it's no different in this pandemic. We've continued to be a part of this platform, and many others, myself, our superintendent, and others on cabinet have continued the conversations, and our principals in local buildings to make sure that we are not functioning in a silo. So I think that one of our challenges is at some point we got to break through the lack of trust or the distrust that continues to plague this district. I think another challenge is the local and national threat to actually strike. That is undaunting in the sense that we cannot bail on our most vulnerable children. We can't bail on them. And the thought of teachers who are being paid with public dollars threatening to strike versus elevating the conversation. Let's continue to work together to problem solve. Let's not abandon our children during this time. And I will say that we have many teachers who are coming back, who are committed to coming back, who have come back. In fact, we see evidence of our plan working even in the summer school space where children are going to school safely. And we've had a lot of national media and others. The Washington Post came and looked at what we're doing. So there's evidence that we are putting into practice the safety measures that we've actually talked about and some of the best practices that we see and we hear about that are happening across the country. I also want to talk a little bit about what some of those safety measures are. I shared this last week when we had the conversation around what options will be for the fall. We know that for our K-8 schools, there will be a face-to-face option for those parents who choose that option. There will also be an online learning option, and we're continuing to talk with our families about what their options are for our high schools, for our large high schools. There will be AB schedules. So if your child goes to school, let's say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, they will probably online learn Tuesday and Thursday and vice versa. We're continuing to refine that based on what we're hearing from our families. Last week, I talked about a survey being launched for our families. That has actually happened. Crystal, you can post that in the chat. But we're continually doing what we say we're going to do. We have about 25% of our families who have responded to that survey now. And we're still looking at 25 to 30%, if not higher now, of families who are still saying that they want a face-to-face option. And so, with that, we're taking our lead from what our families need us to support them in terms of their kids continuing to learn. We've continued to work to train our teachers, and this is not just something that we're preparing for the fall. Jametta, we have started that process back with the distance learning in March and April, and making sure and building the competency of our whole district around the Teams platform, which is the platform that we're using, and we're scaffolding in several others. So that process is ongoing. We have 3 PDs throughout the summer, but again, there's been ongoing PD to make sure that we are building proficiency and support for our teachers to teach online. We know there will be options for teachers to both teach online as well as in person in the classroom. And just will end with some of the safety measures that we're putting in place. Again, all of our staff, as they return to school, have to produce a negative COVID test. That test is then submitted to HR. for verification. We also have to do a daily symptom checker just to make sure that you haven't been in contact with somebody who's tested positive, that you're filling up to par, that the temperature is right. And then when you get that, you're clear to actually come to work. And once you enter a Detroit Public School Community District building, you will then first have your temperature checked with a temperature checker to make sure that that is normal, and then you're permitted to enter the building. For our students, one of the questions that's come up is, how are we going to have students sitting in place all day? You know, as I shared last week, we will continue to build in additional breaks. We know that that might be a challenge and interrupt an instruction somewhat. However, we know that it is working in our summer school space now, where teachers are providing additional breaks for small groups of children who are dismissed to stretch and, you know, jump or whatever they need to do to come back to the learning environment.
Governor Whitmer's new ban on indoor gatherings of more than 10 people, and how are schools going to adapt to that, or is it necessary for schools to adapt to that new guideline?
Christine, I think we're going to have to get some additional clarity on that. Is that the context? Is that in the context of specifically schools, or are we talking about in the context of community? So I think we will seek additional guidance on that. And we've had to make pivots and adjustments this whole way. So depending on what the state ultimately determines, we will make adjustments accordingly.
I'm sure that the guidance on the roadmap is very different than the guidance that she's giving to the general public as it pertains to gatherings. And so I do agree, like I said, I agree with Ms. Buckman about the clarity on that. And I know different things have been coming down from the governor's office since it's been more over the summer that has not pertained to schools in general, which I'm sure it'll start being more specific.
Will families have the choice of picking online learning only? Mm-hmm. I do not feel comfortable sending my children back for in-person. I was told we would have to go with a hybrid schedule.
Yeah, they will have they actually have the choice right now. So for parents who are listening, who are Detroit Public Schools Community District parents, you can go through your child's email. That survey link went out, and you can respond right now that you only want an online option for your family. You are not forced into any particular option or a hybrid option.
And then Ralph, are you doing a similar setup?
Yes, parents definitely will have an option to do just online. If they feel comfortable enough where they would like to keep their child home, definitely.
How will you support families who decide to do virtual learning, those who might not have the technology? And as we know, DPSCD is getting every child a tablet, and that that is currently happening. But maybe the first question, and if there's anything that you want to add to that. So how will you support families who decide to do virtual learning, and especially those that might not have access to the technology?
So yeah, you actually answered part of the question, Christine. We are proud of that. That's just another thing that we have said that we would do as a district, and with support from corporate and foundation leaders, we are able to provide every one of our students with a free tablet that also includes internet access, because having a tablet and you're in a blackout area doesn't help you very much at all. And so we are providing those things for our students. I think in addition to that, we have had a continuum of support for parents, because we understand if you're choosing an online option, we also have to make sure our parents are digitally savvy and understand how to use the Teams platform and communicate with your child's teachers. So there's some ongoing training that is also happening with our families through Parent Academy to really close that digital divide. So those are some of the core supports.
Great.
Just adding to that, earlier in the early height of the pandemic in March, when we were giving out laptops to parents, and we did find out that a certain number of parents, and also through surveys, didn't have that connectivity. So we were able to supply them with hotspots So they were able to have that connectivity. And even moving forward, it would be more schools in the charter landscapes being able to go one-to-one uh, and getting support from the business community and getting those laptops to those students also, and making sure that parents would have the connectivity through hotspots or other means. But every student will be able to have connectivity.
Great, thank you. How often will teachers be tested?
So for Detroit Public Schools Community District, you have to have a negative COVID test in order to come back to school. That unless you have a circumstance where you come in contact and you can't, you have to self-quarantine, you would have to produce another negative test before you're able to come back into the school. And so that's our current cadence around testing. And Christine, as you mentioned that, I did want to lift up, the unfair, well, that's my thought. We think it's unfair that Detroit Public Schools Community District students were forced to be tested, those whose parents chose for them to go to summer school. And as you know, there were a few of our students tested positive. So I do want to follow up with the community on that. We work with the health department to follow up in those instances to support the families. Since that time, we have had no additional positive results from those families or the staff who were working with those students in school. So I just want to take that head on, but mostly push back on this whole notion, if we're going to test students, let's test all students, not just Detroit students, not just Detroit Public Schools Community District students, but every student, if that is going to be the landscapes. But I do think parents have something that they are going to want to say about that and are saying it now.
So could you speak, one of the questions here is about the specific safety measures being implemented. And so I think what you just said about the 2 students that tested positive and the folks that did not come into contact with them, did not, no one has tested positive besides those 2 students. Could you talk about the specific safety measures that were in place that seem to have worked?
Yeah, I think there were 3 students, Christine, and I think, again, this was at the directive of a judge who decided that Detroit students only should have to test. And so parents, many parents gave their permission. Some parents actually refused to have their children tested. And so in that case, we work with the health department. And so, that was our process because they've been our partner from day one. But Christine, can you further clarify when you talk about the process? Because that was not originally part of our process.
Yeah, so the safety measure, yeah. So I think, let me ask it better. So clearly the safety measures worked if no one else tested positive, right?
Yeah.
So what was in place? What was in place? Were teachers wearing masks, students, hand washing stations? Yeah.
Yes, I love it when you answer my questions for me, Christine. It makes my job so much easier.
Can you tell that I've created a plan? Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. It is, as we said, we've taken our guidance from the CDC as well, and they are still saying to us the same thing, the social distancing. So students are socially distant, students are wearing masks. There is a frequency around washing. And, again, those practices have scientifically proven to minimize the spread of COVID. And so we are religiously practicing those things. We've also put accountability measures in place and oversight just to make sure there's consistency around that. So we feel good about where we are and the measures that we have in place.
Great. And then Ralph, I know that Jametta just popped on, which means that we're out of time. There's a few more questions that we'd like all of you to answer. I just want to say what Crystal put in the chat, and I want to give Ralph an opportunity to answer if there's going to be a different cadence for the teachers in his schools. But so Crystal Wilson from the district just wrote in our chat, a daily symptom tracker survey is required for completion prior to entering school for all staff and students. All staff are to report back with a negative test. Precautions that were taken for summer school, staff required negative tests for COVID-19, employee and student training, class size reduction limited to 15 to 20 students, required masks, daily thorough cleanings, disinfecting of all buildings, classrooms, and buses, in addition to what Sharlonda just presented to us. And Ralph, what is the cadence for teachers being tested at your schools?
So definitely all teachers will get a COVID test, and we'll keep up with that information, and it'll be turned into our human resource department. In addition, we've also trained some people in contact tracing, which we thought would be very crucial, which just in case somebody comes up positive with a COVID test. Also, we would take daily temperature checks and keep a tracker of that also. But, and we also had incorporated 2 doctors that are specialists in infectious disease on our own task force, also to help us with guidance in that right direction where we need to go.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.